great information to bring in. Do we have the principal, or does that work out?
She might still be interested.
Okay, we might be getting one of the principals that Caroline went to 2 different schools, and she's going to talk about that and let us know about that. So for about 20 minutes, she's going to present her work to us, and then for about 7 to 10 minutes, everyone will have an opportunity to ask some questions of her. This is the public defense part. So after that, we're going to say good job, and we're going to have everybody depart, and then Mary Kelly, Professor Mary Kelly, who both Caroline and I want to thank for doing a great job as her reader. Most of you also know, of course, she's the director of our MAT program here in the education department, so we're both very grateful for all of her good guidance for me, particularly along the path and as serving as the reader on this thesis. So the 3 of us will have further conversation for more of the private part of the defense after the public part is done. And so let me introduce Caroline Dosky, presenting.
So to start, I just want to thank Dean Kensig and Mary Kelly for being such a great inspiration and support during this past year. And thank you to all my professors, friends, and family who are here. I wouldn't be here without you. So my presentation today and the project that I've been working on for the past year is called Lead, Grow, and Inspire, Linking Leadership to the Elementary Education Curriculum. And I want to start off with a story. When I was in 3rd grade teaching at North Street in the fall semester, I was in my student teaching placement. And I assigned a worksheet to the students, an estimation math worksheet. And the goal of the worksheet was to do it, but also to work in groups. And I emphasize that. I want you to work together in groups. So I had one group over here of 4 students who were working silently and separately. There was no talking amongst them. Then I had a group over here who had broken off by ability level. 2 students were already on question number 2, and 2 were already on question number 10. Then I had this group over here who was arguing over the best way to solve the problem, even though both methods were correct. So when I stepped back and I looked at the students working in groups, I realized that they hadn't learned a fundamental skill, and that was the ability to cooperatively work together. So then I thought back to when I had learned this skill. And yes, I did Girl Scouts, and I'm sure in school my elementary teachers stressed the importance of working together. But I didn't learn about leadership and the idea of working collaboratively together until I was at the Centennial Center for Leadership. And what the Centennial Center does, it focuses on leadership education, which is the theories and the models of leadership, but also leadership development, which is actually going into a leadership role and learning through that process. And so I thought, if only my 3rd graders had what I was exposed to when I was in college, how much better they might have been able to work on that worksheet together. So for the past year, I've been working on these 4 research questions, and I've really been so excited to see how far this project has come. The first one looks at how do children naturally exhibit leadership attributes based on 4 developmental patterns. My second question looks at society, specifically with gender, culture, development, and the classroom experience, and how that impacts students' ideas of how they think about leadership. My third question looks at what is currently being done in schools, because there are certain programs, some of which I'll talk about today, that teaches students about leadership. My fourth question, for those students or teachers who are in schools who don't have that, how can teachers provide a culture where students are able to discover their own potential as leaders? So I'm going to go over 4 aspects of my literature review and just snippets from each of the themes that I've really investigated. So the first one is culture and society. We have both, Joe Glow found that we have both macro and micro influences that influence how we think about leadership. So macro in terms of our country and our community at large. So in terms of the United States, we're a more individualist culture. We think more about ourselves and personally what our goals are instead of thinking about the collectivist identity which Asian cultures more exhibit. So based on this, students have an idea about what leadership is in the United States in terms of themselves more than thinking about others and working together. Then we have development, and a lot of the research on leadership in children has focused on talented and gifted students. These students may already naturally exhibit the ability to public speak, the ability to work together and cooperatively come up with a way to, based on different ideas, to come to a consensus. So where my research differs from this is I really think about leadership in terms of every student being able to be a leader within their classroom, really a strength-based model instead of just those 1 or 2 leaders who stand out from the crowd. Gender is also really important because there are norms and expectations in our society that influences how we think about leadership and who we consider leaders to be. So women tend to lead in more of a harmonious way when men tend to lead more in a managerial style. And this influences because students are able to pick this up and pick up who are teachers, who are our CEOs, who are our presidents, and that influences the way they consider who is a leader and who is not. And lastly, we have unstructured play, which is really important because students tend, when they're just playing naturally, to either be a follower or a leader. And where I've really come is thinking about how can those leaders also in some contexts be followers, and vice versa. How do the followers also take a step up, be courageous and then become a leader? So it's not necessarily thinking that you're one or the other, but in a certain context, where can you be one, and then in another context, be another. So I could have chosen many different frameworks to think about leadership, but the one I chose was the Franklin-Covey's Leader in Me process. And I chose it for 3 different reasons. The first one is in 2008, there were 8 schools who were implementing this process. In 2013, there are over 1,000 schools, as close as Penn Yan, that are implementing this process to teach students about leadership. Another reason I chose it is because of the 1,000 schools, I had access to interviews, I had access to literature on this topic, and I also was able to interview superintendents, principals, people who work for Franklin-Covey, and that provided a great deal of breadth to my research. And the third reason I chose it was because it aligns with many of my values in terms of thinking that every student can be a leader, and how can we figure out what strengths each student has that can bring to the classroom. So this is where audience participation comes in. How many scholarly definitions for leadership exist? And yes, you're working, I already know. How many exist?
50.
20?
50.
50? Anyone else?
1,000.
1,000. Well, a little bit lower than that. Actually, 221 exist, which just shows how complex the field of leadership is. Different experts in the field define it in very different ways, and the way I decided to define it is through Franklin-Covey's 7 Habits of Happy Kids. This was created by Stephen Covey, and this was a way for him to think about leadership for adults, and then he adapted it to be more developmentally appropriate for students. And all around the room I have the 7 different habits, and it's also in your guidebook. And this describes things that students can do, not in the future, not when they're trying to be a professional in the field, but what they can do today to become a better leader of their own lives. So it's very developmentally appropriate, but also they're similar concepts as what adults look at with the 7 habits of highly effective people. And that's how it shows the 7 habits in my guidebook, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So what did I do this past year? I looked at 2 schools in particular. I spent 1 week at Nash Elementary, and I also visited a school that's about 2 hours away in West Seneca, New York. At those schools, I did teacher and administrator interviews. I also had access to interview 2 Franklin-Covey consultants, and these consultants work with superintendents and principals to really implement this process in schools. I also attended a leadership symposium, thanks to William Smith Congress, where I had the opportunity to really hear from experts in the field, as well as superintendents and policymakers about how this process really works, what are the challenges, and what are the unique aspects of it. This was the school in Texas, just for a point of reference, and this was the snowy school on the day I visited in February. So why? Why is leadership important for children? Why don't we just wait till college to learn about leadership? And I'm going to talk about 3 different things. So the first thing is schools used to be this. They used to be almost like an assembly line where students raised their hands when they had to talk, when they wanted to speak, very much in rows. And what the Leader in Me process challenges schools to become is more like this, where students are working together and really learning from one another in cooperative grouping models. So my 3rd grade student teaching placement, the students were in desks like this, but they were not encouraged to communicate and collaborate with one another. This is more of a teacher-directed style of teaching, where the teacher is the source of all knowledge and the students are just taking it in. And the Leader in Me process challenges schools to be more like this, where students are, again, learning from one another and really that they can bring assets to the classroom. And I'm thinking about leadership not in terms of this, where the coxswain knows where they're going, but really in terms of this model, where you don't know who the leader is, but more that every single person in that group needs to work together, and if one person does not pull their weight, the entire group is let down, and how that impacts group work. So my second audience participation is, what is the average age for when managers first receive leadership training? Any ideas? Ages? 30? 40. We're close there. The actual average that they came up with is 42. And this is based on a database from all the people who received leadership training within his group. So this shows to me that leadership is not only learned too late, but that we can never start too early. And it's really, Dean Henson and I talked about yesterday, that this includes the college population. So that's significantly lower than when I first thought. And also, these subjects are never going to go away from schools. They're really important for very great reasons. But we also need to encourage students to think about citizenship, to think about cooperative grouping, responsibility. I'm just going to put them all up there so you can kind of take a sense of what teachers need to, all that they need to accomplish. And a lot of this happens within just various conversations and dialogue with their students. So what the leader in me, why they founded this program, is for students to really believe in their own potential and to realize that everyone can be a leader. And so that's kind of the basis of what I worked on. As you can see, most of the people in the room got the resource guide that I created. And this is created for elementary educators who want to add a leadership component to their classroom. I'm just going to go over one little part of that guidebook today, and I hope you can take it and read it more on your own time. So the part that I'm really going to emphasize is this ubiquitous culture. And when I talk about ubiquitous, it means that every single person in that school understands leadership in that same way. Now, leadership is a lot more complex than the 7 habits, but for students, it's developmentally appropriate that there is one way to define it. So the cafeteria person, or the janitor, or the bus driver, or the parents, or the teachers are all speaking about leadership in the same way, so that students have a sense of it's more developmentally appropriate. So there's 3 aspects to this ubiquitous culture that I'm going to talk about. But this was, I did interviews, and this was one of the quotes, that we just want to look for opportunities to fit the language and methodology into what they are currently doing. It is not to change their whole structure or to squeeze it in at a certain time of the day. Part of what the leader in me does, it allows teachers to look for unplanned moments to teach leadership. So where they may have never done it before, they simply add it to what their current system is. And I think this is really important. It's not just, okay, now we're going to learn about leadership, but it's integrated seamlessly into the curriculum, into the school day, and the routine. So that first part that I spoke about is the importance of a common language. At HWS, when we hear the words interdisciplinary education, we all might think about it in a different way. I think about it in terms of my psychology and dance majors. I compare them and contrast them. But everyone has a kind of overarching umbrella definition for what interdisciplinary education is. When you walk into a leadership school, they all understand what leadership is by the 7 habits. And that's really important because it grounds the work that they're going to do. So whether it's classroom management, or whether it's leadership roles in the community, or doing community service, they're able to talk about leadership through this language. The second part that I'm going to talk about is this theory-based learning, also known as leadership education. And this could be done in 2 different ways. This could be done through spontaneous instruction, more, we like to call it in the education world teachable moments, where you have one-on-one dialogues with students, maybe about turning in homework, or about, oh, you did this really well in class today, and I really want to commend you for that. But it also could be done through intentional planning. And this is where you take a common core learning standard, and you attach it with one of the Covey habits. So you have 2 objectives for a lesson or for an activity that the students are going to do. And one of the really, I think, unique ways that teachers have implemented this leadership aspect is through the data notebook. And this is a way for students to be reflective about their own assessment and where they've come. So I'm just going to take the ELA tab for example. So students might be tracking their fluency scores. They might be tracking how many vocabulary words they have learned. They might be tracking what their goal is in ELA for that week. And then once they've tracked this, they track their progress, they figure out what obstacles they have to overcome. At the end of the week, what the teachers do is they have the students write a letter to their parents saying whether they've reached that goal, what they need to do instead, maybe next week, to continue working on that goal. And instead of it just being parent-teacher conferences, instead this turns into a student-parent-teacher conference, where students are able to use these notebooks. They know exactly what they're doing well in. They know exactly what they need to still work on. And it's an assessment tool where it's not just the teachers keeping the grades, but it's students figuring out what their own progress is within school. And this relates to personal goals too. They also do an amazing job. Kids are really honest about their progress, and I think this is a great way to emphasize this at a young age. And then lastly, we have that action-based learning component. And this could be done in 5 different ways, 3 of which I'll go over. So when I visited these schools, the students were completely and fully running the day. When I went to an assembly, they were the script writers, they were the photographers, they were the videographers. They spoke in front of this large crowd. I didn't see an adult speak once. And so it wasn't just about that student who was really excited to stand in front and be really brave and read that script. But it was also important that there was that script writer or the peers who helped them practice that. So it wasn't just about your leader in front, your stereotypical leader that you think of that's really, bold and courageous, but it's also about those students who have a quiet inner confidence, who have a lot of skills to add too. So the school roles are mainly, you look at the students' strengths and what can they add to that school assembly or that school day, but the classroom is a really great opportunity for students to work on their weaknesses. So maybe they don't like reporting out, and maybe for that one day they're the reporter, and based on what their group discusses, they have to report to the class what the group says. And this provides a safety net for students to practice these skills and to be comfortable at having a range of skills, from public speaking to cooperative grouping to being an artist to a materials manager. So instead of just clustering students in groups of 4, you're really encouraging them to work together and to find out. So if one student's absent, how do you kind of pull up the slack from that student? And how do you encourage every single person to contribute equally? And this is what a 5th grade teacher said about their cooperative groups. We do have fully operating groups, and I am most proud of the fact that they feel comfortable with each other and that they get along with each other. To me, once you feel like you're a part of a group, you are going to be more willing to participate. When one leader was gone, another one took over. But the others were strong and they kept it together, so it was a fully functioning group. And unfortunately, this is what I did not see in my 3rd grade teaching placement. So every school implements this differently. If you take this and you implement every single thing, you have to think about what your school, what are the unique qualities of your school, and what would work for your students. So because it's implemented differently for very good reasons, there are going to be different outcomes and results. But these are some that, based on the research of throughout the past 10, 15 years, that have been notable from the Franklin Covey consultants. And it's not about doing a lot of things differently, but it's about strategically thinking about teaching in a different way and really adding in that leadership culture. So one of the most notable ones that I've seen is the reduced discipline referrals, and this is what principals gravitate to right away. They see that leadership provides a way to talk about classroom management, but in a more positive way. So it's not necessarily about what you see in a school, because a lot of the schools I walked into were so beautiful, and the teachers all spoke in this rosy, colorful language about leadership, and how all their students are leaders. But what really is important is seeing what you don't see. And that's where I saw the differences between some schools who are implementing this kind of visually and auditorially, but it's really about thinking about that culture, and do students really believe in that every single one of them is a leader. And so to wrap up, I've had the privilege of working with the West Street 2nd graders as part of, it's only been a 2-hour workshop, and the students have come to campus and we've talked about leadership. At first they had